Hello, mi cafe comadre, compadre, and everyone in between. I'm trying to give you guys a nickname in case you didn't notice. So, let me know what you think about that, because I like our little coffee dates. I look forward to them, and I want to give it a nickname. But if you don't like comadre or compadre, that's too bad. That's what I'm gonna use for now. For those of you that don't know, a comadre or a compadre typically refers to somebody that you would always be down to gossip with or to talk to after a long day. Like, it doesn't matter what. This is your person who you guys can talk about whatever with. I have a lot of comadres already. But it's usually like a term that you get when you're older in age. But whatever, I'm in my señora era. So anyways, I got a microphone. Shout out to my sibling Mitch. So first and foremost, hello, welcome to Cafe Conversaciones con Kiara, and I am Kiara. My friends know me as Nazari, my family knows me as Kikis, and my people in Guatemala know me as Negrita. Here in my beautiful cafe, we serve coffee with a side of conversation, and today our conversation is going to be surrounding the topic of time and everything that has to do with time. So let's get started. First and foremost, I want to begin this episode with a little disclaimer-ish, but you should know this by now. So I'm not a therapist, but I feel like at the level of self-awareness that I have, although therapy might be beneficial for me, I worry sometimes that I would just be in there doing the therapist job for them. So that has been a big part of why sometimes I'm more reluctant to go to therapy than others. Me personally, I just feel that my level of self-awareness is so high that if I end up going to therapy on a regular basis, that the therapist is just going to sit there, take notes, and watch me have a conversation with myself. And at the end of the therapy session, she's going to have to refund me my money, because ultimately I just did her job for her, and she was just the mediator between me and myself. Anyways, that is my argument as to why I don't need therapy. JK, not true. Everybody needs therapy, especially you. And then me. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is sources of anxiety for me, because I do have high functioning anxiety at times, but that doesn't mean that I am bad at keeping it under wraps. One thing that does cause me a lot of anxiety at times is time. And I remember when I was younger and I wanted to go out, my mom and my dad would come to an agreement on the time by which I had to be home. And usually it was one of those like impossible times where I would only be able to hang out with my friends for maybe an hour or two. And I always thought that it was unfair. But regardless, I was just happy to be there. So nonetheless, I would go and I would be there for an hour or two. But during those 2 hours that I was let out, I was always looking at my phone to check the time. Because God forbid that I plan my return home a minute too late and I get home a minute late. And that was the anxiety that always plagued me. And that's why whenever I was hanging out with friends, sometimes I wouldn't be able to enjoy the experience to the fullest, because I always had that weight of like, oh, what's the time now? And having to be considerate of the travel time and all that. And it was super difficult. Obviously, as I've gotten older, I've found ways to deal with that anxiety a little bit more. And I just set alarms and enjoy, and I don't check the alarms very often. And I also have a little bit more liberty when it comes to going out. Now, I understand that some other people might be plagued by this anxiety caused by time in their, whether it's when they're doing their coursework, whether it's when they're doing their assignments, or even when they're at work. Time is always in the back of their mind of how much they've spent it, how much they've wasted, and how much they have left of it. It's almost like time has become this invisible currency that we wave around. And we see this in accomplishments sometimes. I've been with this company for 2 years. I've been with this company for 3 years. Oh, I was with this company for 4 years before I got promoted, and now it's my first year in this position. And everything is weighed down by time. Now, I have found a word for this extreme excessive time anxiety, and it's called chronophobia. Now, chronophobia is defined as an excessive worry about the passage of time, worries about the future, worries about completing daily tasks, and even one's mortality. And honestly, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I think I do have chronophobia, okay? I'll be the first to admit. There have been times where I've definitely thought about dying and have been terrified of the concept of dying, and maybe I'm not enjoying my life to the fullest, or I'm running out of time, or I need more time. How do I get more time, if that makes sense? And I know that every once in a while we all have that little fear of one day dying and not knowing when that day will be, but I've always thought that mine has been more of like a fear that turns into a panic attack, which is why I'm definitely saying I have chronophobia. And I wanted to know if maybe this chronophobia was a result of something that I underwent younger, or if this is something that has been inflicted by society, or is this more of like an inner issue within my family, if that makes sense. And I have actually found research that proves a little bit of what I'm saying. So I recently took to the World Wide Web of EBSCO. College students, if you know EBSCO, you know EBSCO. But me and EBSCO go hand in hand, like that's my bestie. And it's definitely seen me cry sometimes. But not this time, because I found an article called How is Psychological Control Related to Anxiety Symptoms of Adolescence? Specifically, the role of self-esteem and self-criticism. Basically, this study found that high levels of self-criticism mediated the relationship between parental control and anxiety. This means that adolescents who were more self-critical or, overly harsh on themselves had higher anxiety when faced with controlling parents. Eventually, this would cause the adolescent to internalize their parents' criticism and have a harsh inner voice. But me not being satisfied with that answer, I wanted to know exactly what that did in the brain. Because as we know, anxiety, it is, in the brain. So in our brain, we have a part called the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC for short. The ACC is involved in error detection and conflict resolution. So it's kind of like the problem solver of the brain. So in people who are self-critical, this area might be overactive, which leads to the high emotional reactivity. Because when your brain continuously detects the things that you are doing as wrong, it can fuel emotional distress and worsen your anxiety. Another two besties that go hand in hand are the amygdala and insula. Your insula is basically in charge of the perception of your bodily sensations, aka interoception. So, but by this point, you might be wondering, well, that's good and all. It's great that you are self-aware enough to have done your own research and figure out what the heck is going on in your brain, Kiara. But really, how can I? So when you take all of this into consideration, the question that we remain with, and basically the root of the problem, is how can I regulate the amygdala? No, how can I regulate the relationship between the amygdala and the insula? Because really it's those two that keep giving you that time anxiety. And while I can't give you a direct answer, because again, I'm not a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, or any of the above, I can help find ways that have worked for me for you to get a little bit of a hold on your anxiety. First and foremost, introducing the guest star of today's episode, have you tried matcha? And I know that there are a lot of people who don't particularly love matcha. I mean, the flavor of grass doesn't exactly appeal to everyone, but it does appeal to me. And here's why it should appeal to you as well. So matcha contains a bioactive compound called L-theanine. And maybe you've heard of this before, but let me tell you exactly what it does. So L-theanine actually blocks excitatory signals. So these are the signals that are very excited, and enhances the mass producing of a calming neurotransmitter called GABA. And what Yo Gabba Gabba does, it's not just a calming neurotransmitter, but it also acts in the sense that it dampens your amygdala's reactivity, telling it to sit the fuck down and shut the fuck up. This reduction in your physiological stress lessens your insulin's hypersensitivity. So now your insula is not as sensitive to bodily sensations of you being overwhelmed or upset. Therefore, it can no longer communicate to the amygdala that it may need some distress signals put out to the rest of the brain. Therefore, you no longer feel as anxious as you once did. Another benefit of drinking matcha is that you also get a balance of alertness without that wired up feeling that most people get off of caffeine. So, now that we've embarked on this psychological journey of time and anxiety, let's talk about the dictator that is time. And to talk a little bit about this dictator, I'm going to bring abroad the Substack article that I recently read called Ruled by Clocks. So essentially the Substack article talked about how in 1932 a Fijian man was interviewed by a man from Melbourne on the Western's concept of time and clocks and its relationship with freedom and productivity. And what the Fijian man said was that the clocks were deities, essentially. And they were only designed to really force productivity out of you. Before clocks existed, before we communicated in time was a little more personal and it was a little more relaxed. The Fijian man said that based on his experience in the islands, when a man was hungry, he would simply go eat. He wouldn't wait for the clock to let him know that it was time for lunch. And when a man was sleepy, then the man would just go to sleep because he wasn't going to wait on the clock to dictate what time he would have to go to sleep at. And I was thinking about this in terms of at work or school when we are supposed to be there for a set time, say from 9 to 5, and how by the time 1 p.m. rolls around, you start dreading whether you've had any productive moves at all during the day. You feel that you have to be productive during this given time frame, and if you're not, then you're a terrible person, you're a failure, you're lazy, you haven't done anything at all that day. So in a way, the clock begins to shame and taunt you. You see this also in cases of procrastination among college students, when you think that you'll have time, when you underestimate the amount of time that you'll complete a task in. Usually, for me, this looks like I'll start working at 7 p.m. And then 7:02 rolls around and you're like, oh, wait, actually, let me wait until it's 7:15, right? So, and it's also interesting because we actually have labels for the people who won't play by the clock's rules. You might know these labels as autism and ADHD. And the worst part is that we constantly think that these labels are indicators that we need to figure out how to fix a person. But the Maori people think differently. They believe that we should honor those people. It's interesting because in the Maori language, ADHD is, and really quick, I just want to say I might mispronounce these, so please let me know what the proper pronunciation is if you know in the comments below. But in the Maori language, autism isn't known as autism. It's known as takiwatanga, which means in their own time and place. And ADHD isn't known as ADHD. It's known as arore retini, which means attention goes to many. And it's kind of beautiful to think about it that way because it means that these are the people that have truly been freed from the concept of time and would rather do things on their own time in no rush and still get things done. And I think that's a great way to live. See, we were never meant to be on a schedule or on a time crunch. Our bodies yearn to slow down, to rest, or even to be inconsistent sometimes. And low-key, we're slowly getting back to it. We've even generated self-care days in which we are allowed those days to be inconsistent, to be lazy, to be unproductive, all for the sake of preserving our own mental and even physical health. We've scheduled time to engage in behaviors that will give some of that time back to us. For example, people who work out, they put time into their own body so that in the long run they'll have less time to worry about how they look and more time to feel great. With that being said, I've also never been a big fan of those like little Pinterest posts where people will say clean girl routine, and it's literally like 6 a.m. wake up, 6:30 brush your teeth, 6:50. Like, that's still being dictated by clocks. And am I a terrible person because I decided to wake up at 6:05 and not 6 a.m.? Does that really make me any less of a clean girl? Another article that I want to bring into light, because Substack has just been blessing my feed lately, is an article on why when we were kids time felt slower and how we get that back. And the biggest thing that I loved about this article was how in the article it talked about when we were kids, everything was brand spanking new, and it was that idea of novelty that intrigued us and made our days go by so much slower. I want you to recall the last time that you went to the park when you were a kid, and it could have been your very first time at this particular park. Think about how those swings felt, how the layout of the park looked so much different from any other park that you had been at. What material was the park made out of? Was it steel? Did it have one of those slides that would burn your ass as you started going down on it? Did it have monkey bars? Was it cool? And did it have like one of those monkey bars, that little pulley feature with the wheel that you could slide from one end of the park to the other end with? Or was it just plain? Did it just have the basics? Did it have a climbing wall, perhaps? I urge you that in everything that you do in your daily life, try to approach things with a little bit more novelty. I think that's where we can begin to get our time back, is by looking at things differently, by changing our perspective. Instead of dreading going to work, try to find a different path. Get up a little earlier if you need to. And instead of taking the same old streets to get to work just because they function very well or because they don't run into any traffic, find a different route and see where it takes you. Maybe you'll discover a new coffee shop, or maybe you'll even discover a new restaurant that you'll want to take your partner to later, or that maybe you want to take yourself to later. Give yourself some more time to think about your grocery list and really listen to what it is that your body really wants to eat this evening or even this week. Approach everything you do with a sense of novelty, as if it's something that you're doing for the very first time ever, or something that you're seeing for the very first time ever. And really listen to how much time that is giving back to you. Another thing that I love about drinking matcha is the process of making it. Typically when you make matcha, it requires a lot of time and a lot of heart. And I say a lot of heart because there's an aspect that comes with making ceremonial matcha in which I have to wait for the water to cool down, and it can't be too hot, can't be too warm. It'll just have to be at like a nice little room temperature feeling. So I have to wait for the water to cool down, and I have to dip my finger in a little to see if it's too hot or if it's too cold. And then there's the process of whisking it that also requires time. But the novelty of that is actually really cool, because I'm not always going to get the same layer of froth, and I'm not always going to get the same air bubbles out, and I'm not always going to get the same color of matcha. And that's actually kind of beautiful when you think about it that way. I also urge you to approach relationships with novelty as well. You'll also see how much your relationship is changed by approaching it with novelty. Instead of looking at a relationship as a 2-year commitment that you have made so far to another person, think about really approach those 2 years as a novel sense. You've known this person for a very fraction of their life, and you have been able to witness so much in that small fraction of life. Now think about how much more you could appreciate from that person if you approach them as a brand new person. I don't know. At this point, I'm starting to ramble on about novelty that I may start to get a little distracted from the main point. Time anxiety, it's freaking real. But that doesn't mean that it's a terrible thing. basically, time anxiety, it's freaking real. And what's worse is it may come from your own generations. It may come within your own family. And rather than dismissing it, rather than trying to fix it, embrace it and understand it in the best way that you can, and find ways to regulate it that you feel comfortable with. Whether it's drinking matcha, setting boundaries with people, turning off your phone so you can enjoy the time that you have without thinking about how much time has passed. Setting alarms so you're not constantly checking your phone at parties or at functions or even when you're just out and about. And if you ever want to slow time down and enjoy the present, approach things with novelty. Think of everything as a brand new experience, a brand new sight, and a brand new idea. Lastly, eat when you want to eat. Sleep when you want to sleep. Work when you want to work. We all adhere to so many rules at the same time that I think it can be overwhelming to balance all of them at once. Give yourself some leniency because you freaking deserve it. You'll never get this time back, so why not make it a little longer while you can? No, ya se nos acabó nuestro cafecito, or a little matcha. I have a little bit left, but I think this is all the ice that's melted, so it might not be like the best premium matcha. With that being said, I will see you guys later for another coffee and another tasty conversation.